Hmm. Hi, Greg. How are you? Hi, Dolores. Nice to see you. Hi, Devora. I guess you're here too because Greg has said hello to you. I can't see you yet. Also, Jimmy Sunderland has joined. Thank you, Jimmy. And but Cora Manuel is here as well. Hi, Cora. Nice to see you again. Okay, so tonight's topic is impeachment, I'm afraid. Uh, I have to say some things about that. Okay, I guess I feel particularly qualified to talk on that subject since I am, after all, a political scientist. That is my home field. That's where I got my PhD, and that was my first love. So, of course, I'm very familiar with the U.S. Constitution. I've taken some con law. I was a very good student in my con law classes, and I've always thought that I had a mind for the law. And of course, I've studied the politics of impeachment from time to time. Uh, I was old enough during the Nixon impeachment. In fact, I was in my 30s at the time. So I I should say, I paid extremely close attention to that. Hi, Rich Serber. Nice to see you. And I learned quite a lot about the politics of impeachment from that situation. And then, of course, I also lived through the Clinton impeachment proceedings when he was the president. And in school, I studied the history of the Andrew Johnson impeachment. So I may have a broader perspective than some of the commentators who were talking about impeachment at this point and giving their opinions about impeachment. Okay, first of all, let me say right off the bat that I know there are a lot of opinions out there from people I respect and generally agree with on most things, saying that but to get involved in impeachment now was really stupid. Okay, that it's a disaster. That for all kinds of reasons, we should be just focusing on the election to come, and that we should be putting all our energies in. Some people think to replace Trump. Others who think to replace him with a Democrat, and still others who think that we need to replace him with a progressive, and perhaps even one particular progressive, namely Bernie Sanders. Certainly my favorite progressive at this point in time. I know to say in time is redundant after this point, but everybody says that, so it just seems natural to say this point in time. Okay, anyway, to go forward with this now, then. Uh, I've always thought from the start of the situation with Trump that he should have been impeached if possible on day one. I had a simple view of that. And my view is based on the idea that on day one, he was in violation of the Emoluments Clause to the Constitution. I think that's a straightforward case. It's extremely simple to make that particular case. Why on the first day? Because he failed to divest himself of his business interests or to put them into a blind trust. This was the custom, okay, of other presidents, okay, other people who came into the presidency so that there would be no conflict of interest while they were there. Trump is the first president in my memory to retain his business interests and, most importantly, to retain the ownership and control over those particular businesses. Now, it was especially visible at the time that with respect to hotels, to his hotels, he was profiting from his presidency. On his first day as president, when a bunch of people registered at his hotels, when they canceled registration at other hotels and registered at his hotels instead, it was obvious that their motives were to curry favor with him, or at least to do what was most acceptable in Washington during the changed times of his administration and his presidency by patronizing his hotels. This was, on their part, a rather transparent sort, of bribe. And he, in failing to divest himself of his interests, was taking that bribe from day one. And in particular, the Saudis were bribing him with enormous amounts of money by staying at his Trump hotel in the Washington area. I mean, millions were involved in this in the first year. So it was clear that he was violating the emoluments clause from the first. Now, nobody seemed to think that was a big deal. The Republicans didn't seem to think that was a big deal. They thought the public was going to overlook it, and the public has overlooked it. Why? Because the mainstream press didn't think it was important. They didn't cover it. They didn't keep on hammering at it. They should have hammered at it every day. They did not. Sorry, Susan. I'm trying to modulate the echo right now. Please, everybody else, tell me whether I still have an echo, whether it's giving you a problem. I've tried to cut back on my volume to help you out. I have the Facebook sound is silenced. Shouldn't be coming from Facebook. So I'm not sure exactly where it's coming from. Susan says it's good now. Okay, I was able to eliminate it. Fine. So, the mainstream press refused to cover it. They think it was very important. Even the alternative media, while noting it at first, they dropped it actually very quickly, even though this man, the President of the United States, was profiting every day from his presidency. Every single day. He was profiting from his presidency in violation of the Constitution. Now, that alone was an impeachable offense. And that impeachable offense has been going on now every day since January 20th of 2017. So, it is 2.5 years now that he has been violating the Constitution on those grounds alone. So we all see that. Is that important? I personally think it's important whenever a president violates the Constitution. It's extremely important. Extremely important. The Constitution is our basic law. We cannot allow presidents to violate it. Now, I know that we have routinely allowed presidents to violate the Constitution on various occasions. They have violated our civil liberties at times. They have violated our civil rights at times. They have violated the freedom of the press at times. And we have allowed it. And we have allowed governors of states to do that. And we have allowed the mayors of cities to do that. But I am an absolutist when it comes to the Constitution, I'm afraid. I think if someone violates their oath of office to defend and uphold the Constitution, they should be immediately impeached and removed from federal office. Now, you may say that I'm a hypocrite because I want to apply that to Trump, but I haven't wanted but to apply that to anyone else. But that's not true. I did want to apply it to Obama. I did want to apply it to George W. Bush. I did want to apply it to Bill Clinton. But of course, I was a lonely voice crying in the wilderness about that. I have been consistent, though. I've wanted to apply it to everyone in office who violates the Constitution of the United States. And I insist that it would be a good thing for all of us, not a good thing, a great thing for all of us and for our democracy if we stopped the moral hazard that is going on with respect to the Constitution. I am unusual in that I do not think the actions of Jerry Ford in trying to save the country grief. Don't forget Dick Cheney. I don't yet. Dick Cheney goes without saying. But Clara. So, uh, trying to heal the wounds of the country by forgiving Richard Nixon, by pardoning Richard Nixon. I think that was a terrible mistake because that helped to reinforce the idea that the president is above the law and cannot be punished for violating the law and for violating the Constitution. That is what was done by President Nixon, and he should never have been pardoned for it. After his presidency, he should have been made to face a prosecution, to have a jury trial, and to pay the price for the crimes that he committed while in office. The fact that Jerry Ford let him off the hook and that the country as a whole failed to do that cleared the way for Reagan to violate the law, cleared the way for Bush to violate the law, cleared the way for every president since to think that they were above the law. Now, Trump is only the worst of the offenders, only the present person offending by insisting that he is above the law, more public than others in insisting this, more insistent on his lack of respect for the law and on his insistence that he is above the law. At some point, to have a democracy, my friends, we have to put an end to this moral hazard that we have allowed to eat at the innards of our democracy for so many years. We have to stop tolerating these kinds of offenses from our highest officials. They need to be the ones most respectful of the law and most insistent on the upholding of the law. Okay, now, Donald Trump gives us a chance to put a stop to this moral hazard that we have been living with for so many years now. And we should not pass up this opportunity. We cannot pass up this opportunity. We've allowed 9 months to go by. We've allowed 9 months to go by without doing anything about this, while the Democratic Party held the House and the power of impeachment. Jimmy Sunderland asks, aren't you terrified of Pence? Susan Beaver says, okay, Jimmy Sunderland says, aren't you terrified of Pence? I see your point of impeachment, but it's so close to elections and Pence terrifies me. Okay, I'm not very terrified of Pence. The reason why I am not terrified of Pence, I will get to later. I will get to later. But no, I am not at all terrified of Pence. But even if I were terrified of Pence, the point of impeachment, the point of impeachment, and the point of conviction is to create a situation where all presidents who follow, including possibly Pence, know clearly that there are limits to their power and that their abuse of law and their abuse of the Constitution can lead to them being replaced and then prosecuted in courts of law across the United States and in international courts as well. If Pence were to take office, he would be terrified of something. He would be terrified of what had happened to Donald Trump. And he would be much more careful than Trump was. But, of course, one reason why I'm not terrified of Pence is I don't think there's a chance in hell that he'll be able to build a campaign in order to win the presidency, as long as certain things happen. So let us move now to continue to discuss what's going to go on in this impeachment situation, or what should go on. First, as I said in my description, it needs to be fast, clean, and quick. We should pick out the 10 or 12 things which are clear violations of law, and there are many more violations actually than that. I think by now there are hundreds, of violations. But for the bill of impeachment, focus on 10 to 12 that are very, very clear, like, for example, his profiting from his hotels since the first day he got into the presidency. And just focus on those and politic based on those. Campaign to the American people, educate the American people on what points of the Constitution and of law and of international law and of treaty have been violated by him, and explain to the people why those violations are so important and why They are in place for good reasons, and why they are necessary for us all to remain in place. Let's take some other violations. Human rights violations, the treatment of the immigrants and the children at the border. Those are violations of international law by the government of the United States on the orders of Donald Trump. He should be impeached for those violations of human rights. He needs to be impeached also for the Venezuelan policy. Do you know that the sanctions against that country have caused already 50,000 fatalities due to lack of medical supplies? 50,000 fatalities already from taking economic sanctions against a nation that has never harmed us and that has given no intention that it would ever harm us. There's no evidence of any intention of ever turning towards the United States to take hostile action against the United States. Whatever else the regime in Venezuela is guilty of, it is not guilty of that. We had no right under international law to take these economic sanctions against them. It is aggression, naked aggression, unworthy of the United States and a clear violation of international law and our international treaties. And of course, there are all kinds, of other violations that occur every day. We need to pick items that are violations that are not matters for arguments, where the violations are plain to the heavy majority, the vast majority of the American people who are still able to read for themselves and to think for themselves, and who, when presented with a fact, can easily agree, yes, he did do these things, and yes, now that you pointed out, they are against the law. They are violations of the law. And if he was anybody else other than the president who was doing those things, he would be prosecuted for them. We need to get people to agree to that, because those are the good reasons why he should be instantly removed from the office of the presidency. So, as I say, that's the way to do this fast, clean, and quick. Pick out clear violations of law, international law, treaties, and the Constitution of the United States. Prosecute for those things in the House and later in the Senate. Impeach based on that. Do not try to delay this. Do not try to drag it on and on and on in hopes that it will go away. All that will do is eat into the chances of forces in this country that want change and that need change and that need things done to save our very lives. These are things if we delay on this, these are things that are going to hurt our chances to elect the people who can help us to solve our particular problems. This must not go before the end of this year. It cannot run deeply into the primary season. It will already distract attention from the debates and from the campaigns of the presidential candidates right now. But that is something we can live with. We don't need to have the attention of the mainstream media on our campaigns right now. The impeachment inquiry, focusing as some of it is going to on Trump's actions in the Ukraine, are also going to put a crimp in Joe Biden's chances for the presidency, because his hands there were not clean, I should say. I don't know, or I should say, I do know, that other people purport to have looked into this and to have cleared Joe Biden. But I don't trust their clearing of him. Who cleared him? People within the Obama administration? Really objective, right? The people over in the Ukraine who had done what he asked them to do and who would not want to admit that they were forced into doing it, or that the company Hunter Biden was connected to was corrupt. And come on. These previous inquiries were conducted by biased observers who had every interest in exonerating Hunter Biden and also Joe Biden. But the facts remain. Hunter Biden had no clear qualifications to occupy the position that was given to him in the Ukrainian company that he joined and that he earned $50,000 a month from for quite a long period of time. He was obviously appointed to the board of that particular company because of the possibility that it would give them access to high-level government figures here in the United States, people they wanted to have access to, so that they could get aid from the United States. What other qualification did Hunter Biden have? I think people who want to defend Joe Biden and Hunter Biden on this have to remove the clear appearance of a conflict of interest. I'm not here to tell you whether there really was a conflict of interest. I'm not in a position to say the deals were corrupt. But we're all in a position to say it has the appearance of a conflict of interest. Now, Joe Biden, in his position as Vice President of the United States, was mandated to avoid not just conflicts of interest, but the appearance of a conflict of interest. He ignored that mandate. It applies to all government officials. Joe Biden ignored it because the appearance of a conflict of interest is plain for all to see. So one of the results of impeachment hearings, of the inquiry, no matter how much they try to hide it, One of the results is going to be to make this appearance of Joe Biden's conflict of interest more and more clear to the American people, which then in turn will reflect on his ability to run against Trump. Because unless the impeachment process succeeds, which of course it may not, there's a very good chance it will be blocked in the Senate of the United States. And then we want this to be in a position where there will be a strong candidate who will be able to run for the Democrats and who will have clean hands, who will not have the appearance of dirty hands, as Joe Biden now has, and as will become clear to the American people through the hearings themselves. Of course, Trump is going to help to bring that out as part of his defense. He's going to say, well, he did it, why can't I? And then a story will have to be told about why Joe Biden did not do this. And when you're on the defensive like that, on such a serious matter, then it becomes a tough thing for you to run for president. So Biden's been slipping already for various other reasons. And he's going to slip even further. By the end of this impeachment process, if we get it done by the end of the year, he won't be a factor in the presidential run any longer. I don't know who's going to be in it at that time, who's going to be at the center of it. I'm sure Warren and Bernie Sanders are going to be at the center of the fight at that time if Trump is impeached, and if it goes on to the Senate, and if Trump is convicted by the end of the year, as the Republicans may want to do, because as some others have mentioned today in commentary on the situation, if Trump does get impeached by the House, and if the bill of impeachment does go to the Senate, there is much to be gained from the Republican point of view of going along with a trial in the Senate. And if Trump is impeached, then he's impeached. The Republicans are not at all terrified of Pence. He is one of their own. He served among them in Congress for a very long time. And he was part of the rightist group, the neoliberal rightists in Congress. He was part of the religious right, as some of you know. So he's a homie to them. So they're not afraid of losing any advantage because Pence would be president instead of Trump. On the other hand, it seems to me Pence would be able to do very little that Trump has not already done, because he would not have a widespread basis for popular support. And also because the Democratic House would still be there. So Pence is bound to be a caretaker president. And a caretaker president would not be at all a bad thing in this particular election. Then we have to ask, who are the Republicans likely to nominate? Who are they likely to nominate in that situation? If the dangerous thing happens and Trump is impeached, Then what happens? Then Pence immediately takes over. Are the Republicans going to run Pence? Are they going to run Pence against Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren? I don't think so. They're going to try to run someone who they think is more charismatic and likely to be more popular. I mean, Pence is a colorless character who has almost no charisma or crowd appeal at all, who is an unpopular governor, okay, of Indiana, who did not do a good job there, and who the Republicans never considered to be presidential material. They're not going to nominate him. So who are they going to run? I think they're going to turn to Romney again. Or they're going to turn to Paul Ryan. I don't think either of them have a ghost of a chance under present conditions in the fall elections. But of the two, I think the person who has the best chance is probably Romney. Because Romney may have the adaptability to try to speak to the climate crisis. He may be the more dangerous of the two. But I really don't see that they have anybody with crowd appeal or anybody who has charisma or anybody who can make a credible case for their side after Trump. So, when it comes to the elections of 2020, I am not afraid, okay, of any of them. Do I think there's going to be a high turnout from the right in 2020 if we impeach Trump and if he's convicted? The answer to that question is no. Of course, it's going to depend on who the Republicans nominate. But if they nominate someone else as terrible as Trump, or nearly as terrible as Trump, I mean, let's say Ted Cruz, okay, or somebody like that, that's not going to be sufficient to beat our turnout. Look at 2018, what the turnout was like in 2018. That was not even a presidential election. But people wanted to get rid of the Republicans by then. That's why the Democrats had such a convincing victory in 2018. 2020 is bound to be even worse. The way the situation is shaping up now, the two front runners after an impeachment inquiry are likely to be Warren and Sanders. You know that I believe the only candidate who can help us get out of the fix that we're in is really Sanders. I don't think Warren has what it takes. I don't think she can do the Green New Deal that we need to survive and to prosper. I don't think so at all. But I do think the primary contest is then going to be between Warren and Sanders. And I think that's the best contest for us to have in the fall. I think that's what's going to happen. I think we also have to pay close attention to the likely aftermath of any successful impeachment. In other words, an impeachment and a conviction of Trump. The likely aftermath, okay, is this. Okay. Trump will shortly be indicted after he leaves the presidency. He will very shortly be indicted in New York State for various crimes that the state has been investigating. They'll take very quick action against him once he's out of the presidency. Once that cloak is no longer his. Now, Pence, of course, could put a crimp in this by pardoning Trump. But Pence won't be in a strong enough position to pardon Trump right then. Because if Pence has any presidential hopes, he won't be in a position to pardon him. Because after he's been impeached and convicted for crimes, for legal violations, I don't think this appeal to, oh, the impeachment has been so divisive, the country needs to heal now. I don't think that's going to work. That may have worked in the 1970s for Nixon. But the United States was not in a desperate situation at the time. We are now. We can't afford to heal. However divisive the impeachment process is going to be, we can't afford to heal. We have to go forward and solve our problems if we want to survive. And we don't need a unified country to do that. We just need a heavy majority in support of the government to do that. Our job is not to unify the whole country. Our job is to get a heavy majority and then work to have our policies unify the whole country. And I tell you now that when Bernie Sanders passes his agenda, from what we've already seen of it, the whole country is going to unite behind that agenda, because most of the people in this country are going to benefit from it. Most of the people are going to live better and with more confidence and with a picture, an image of a bright future once that agenda begins to be passed and to take hold by the Congress. Once that happens, the country is going to unify around that agenda. And Trump and his impeachment will be forgotten. Forgotten. Now, Tulsi Gabbard today made a statement saying that she was against impeachment because it was going to be divisive. Does she really believe the coming election campaign is not going to be divisive? Has she lost her mind? What is she thinking of? What is going to be more divisive? The impeachment investigations and the impeachment, or the coming campaign? If Trump is in it, the coming campaign is going to be much more divisive. It's going to be much more divisive. And the idea she stated that any removal of a president has to be done through voting and not by the elite in the Congress. That is an anti-constitutional statement. I am sorry. The impeachment clauses were put in the Constitution for a reason. They are there so the Congress can check the executive in our system of checks and balances. The founders envisioned that a tyrannical president would be able to be removed from office before his term of service was up because he was a tyrant. That's a good provision in the Constitution. It's a provision that enables us to avoid a revolution against a king. Trump wants to be a king. He is working towards a fascist government which will allow him to be a virtual king. That's what he's always been about. The impeachment clause in the Constitution is there to check people like that. It is not there for any reason. Why would anybody think it's somehow a violation of the democratic will of the people because Trump in 2016 won a disputed election by a small margin in the Electoral College, when, if anything, doesn't have any legitimacy today in the Constitution that was originally passed? It is the Electoral College. Most people currently believe the majority should rule, and not the majority in the Electoral College, the popular majority. Most people think the Electoral College is a travesty. Most people who think about it think that George Bush's election with a minority of the populace in 2000 was a travesty. And most people think, okay, or at least the majority of people in the country, and I say probably a big majority, because even though Trump was only outvoted by 3 million votes in the general in 2016, there are probably quite a few people who voted for Trump who, if asked, would say, well, it would have been far better if he had gotten an actual popular majority, who believe in popular sovereignty and who don't believe in the Electoral College. I don't believe Trump was a legitimate president from the beginning. To this day, there are people who don't refer to him as the President of the United States. They only say the occupant of the Oval Office, the current occupant of the Oval Office. In other words, the legitimacy of an election by the Electoral College, which is not also an election by a popular majority, is in question. It's been in question every time it's occurred in our history. And it is in question today, and has been in question since Trump took over the government and began to divide us even more than we have been divided in the past. We have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge that. For Tulsi to cite, the legitimate election of Trump in 2016 today in her statement was a travesty. It was a travesty. That was not a legitimate election. It was a rigged election. The gerrymandering was awful in that election. The voter suppression was awful in that election. And then finally, it was only decided by the Electoral College, which should never have been in place in the first place in that election. I mean, the Electoral College is like the rotten boroughs were in England in the 1700s. The English got rid of their rotten boroughs. We've never been able to get rid of our rotten boroughs. Anyway, I generally like Tulsi Gabbard very, very much. I've liked her policy positions. I've liked her foreign policy ideas. I've liked the way she holds herself and she expresses herself with a tremendous amount, okay, of dignity. I like her honesty and her integrity. But I think she's dead wrong in her position on impeachment. She's wrong about the divisiveness being important, and she's wrong about the legitimacy of Trump's election in 2016. It was an illegitimate election. And in fact, a lot of elections today in the United States are illegitimate. They're illegitimate because they're rigged, and we all know that. And we shouldn't be tolerating rigging any longer. And one way to get rid of a president who rigged his election, and for that matter, to get rid of a president who otherwise would have rigged her election, because they were both rigging, of course, would be to impeach such a president. That's the remedy in the Constitution for a tyrannical regime. So, I didn't mean to single Tulsi out, but when she made that statement today, giving her reasons for why she opposed impeachment, that infuriated me. Now, if she had just made a simple statement and said, well, look, I think from a political point of view, it's too dangerous to have an impeachment now. We have to go forward with this election, work as hard as we can, and get our people elected. I would have respected that a lot more than I respected what she had to say about it. Now, I want to say something else about this business of divisiveness. When people start talking about divisiveness and having to come together, I start putting my hand on my wallet, because those are the opening sentiments in an argument for bipartisanship or transpartisanship or whatever. The American people coming together behind a vague agenda that no one knows what they're committing to. I don't hold with that kind of thing. I hold with specific agendas. To give her credit, one of the reasons why I like Tulsi is she's got a pretty specific agenda. She should stick to that. There are many people who think her agenda is divisive. I say too bad. I like her agenda. Of course, the agenda I like best, okay, is Bernie's agenda. But what I'm saying is, I don't want people to unite for the sake of uniting. I don't want people to end the divisiveness merely for the sake of ending the divisiveness. I want people to end it by uniting behind an agenda for social, economic, environmental, and political justice, for an agenda that serves the public purpose. Only that should end our divisiveness. And even then, we always need to have debate. We always need to have criticism. We always need to have people who are going to set us right when we make a misstep. That's the nature of democracy. That's what it's all about. It's not about ending divisiveness. Maybe it's about that in Iowa, where there's Iowa nice, or in Minnesota, where there's Minnesota nice. I don't mean to speak ill of those states. I actually like them both. But the point is, sometimes we need to have public conflicts to solve our problems. And when we solve our problems, then we can heal. But at this point, our problems have all accumulated to such a degree that we need to step forward, we need to get a heavy majority, and we need to get that heavy majority in back of real solutions that will end these particular problems. And once that is done, we can heal. Once we got through the Depression, once we got through the Second World War, then we were in position to have a healing form of politics with a considerable amount of bipartisanship and compromise. But those periods only last, and only should last, for 10 or 15 years in our history, because new problems are always emerging. By the time of the 1960s, it was time to handle our civil rights crisis. And we've never successfully handled the great issues of race that we finally turned to face then. They're still with us today. They're among the many problems that we have allowed to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate over the years. And so that's what I think about impeachment going forward, or part of what I think about it. I also want to warn against the circus. The circus. The mainstream media are going to want to get views out of this. They're going to want to get views. And they're going to want to get lots and lots of ad revenue out of this. And they're going to want to sensationalize it. And they're going to want to create a circus. And the DNC is going to want to create a circus. And the centrist politicians on the Democratic side are going to want to create a circus. And they're going to want to use that circus to distract attention away from the real issues of this particular campaign. Now, I've made it obvious that I think one of the issues is Trump in the presidency. Any longer than that is absolutely necessary. I think that's a real big issue. And I want impeachment to handle that issue. But I also think that the issues of the age are Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, and a society in the United States and in the rest of the world that is finally just. And I don't want distraction from those issues to occur due to the circus. We know the circus is going to go on. We in the alternative media, and that includes you and me and all of us, we in the alternative media have to keep going day after day after day. And we have to say Well, that's going on in the circus over there. Now that you're learning about the circus, here are the real issues that you have to keep at the top of mind and that you have to vote on. And we know what those issues are, people. We know they're embodied in Bernie Sanders' agenda. I don't think he's missed an important issue. And if he does miss an important one, he will respond to us if we call attention to it. Besides, Susan says impeachment doesn't kick the president out, but corrects his actions. Impeachment may tend to correct his actions, Susan. Conviction does remove the president, and then the criminal justice system can correct his actions. Susan says Indiana has some really lousy politicians. Susan Eldridge has joined. We now have two Susans. Susan Beaver says Warren is a spineless, untrustworthy, insidious fraud. And Nancy Blackmar says Bernie Green New Deal. Steve Wolfbrand says yes. Steve DeVore says agreed. Matt Waldy has joined. Margot Shepard has joined. Margot Shepard says late, sorry, no nap, overslept. Jimmy Sunderland says Rachel Maddow is going to have a field day with this for the next year. Let her have her field day. She will studiously avoid talking about the issues that need to be talked about until Trump is out of the picture, and then she'll find something that's not a real issue to talk about. She's not in the part of the media that we want to pay attention to. Bonnie is reminding me to sit up now because I'm totally immersed in your comments at this point, and I'm not really sitting up. But you're right, Jimmy. Now, Rachel is going to go on now to entirely new heights in her viewership, fulminating every day about the impeachment proceedings. And Elizabeth Berg in Netherlands says, will Bernie address weather engineering? Are you talking about carbon engineering? Removing vast quantities of carbon from the air using engineering techniques? Okay. I don't know whether he will readily address that. We should probably start addressing that here in our live streams, actually, more than we have, in order to talk about the feasibility of it, in order to talk about what kind of society it implies. Okay, if we do that, the social impacts, okay, the economic impacts. One reason why I think that Bernie has been rather reluctant to embrace some of the technological solutions that involve heavy investments of real capital is because those solutions end up in the hands of private companies that then use them to block further progress. And so Bernie's intuition, I think, is in back of solutions to withdrawing carbon out of the air that involve reforms and revolutions in our agricultural systems. And the reason why he's for that, of course, is because that will involve an entirely different kind of infrastructure, which is amenable to small business people and to small farmers. And so there's kind of a social bias there. When I say social bias, I'm not actually criticizing that. What I am saying is that Uh, when we consider new technologies that we want to introduce into society, we need to address the questions of the likely social and political and cultural impact of those particular technologies and make our decisions on whether to adopt the new technologies in part on that kind of basis. So, yeah, Bonnie is reminding me again. Frozen. Okay, so Elizabeth Bergen, Netherlands says no, the chemtrails that are toxifying us and the animal, soil, wood, water, food, not to mention directing the climate disasters that are happening. If it were all the corporations doing it, he might, but it is also the military. Yes, I think he is going to address those things. Absolutely. I think that's implied in his Green New Deal as already stated. That that is going to be a part of it. So that's my answer to that question. I'm sorry that I misunderstood you, Elizabeth. So, are there any other questions or comments? I noticed for some reason I've been freezing up a good deal, which also normally is due to high CPU usage, which in turn is probably due to my browser taking up too much memory. I can try to do something about that a little bit now. Okay, that should help a little bit. There you go. Right. Okay. So, yes, I have improved my CPU usage. Okay, let me go back to Facebook and see if there are any more comments. Here we go. Nancy says, "Great evening, Dr. Joe. Thank you." Thank you, Nancy, for coming. And thank you all for coming. I really enjoyed our discussion tonight. Please share, like, and subscribe as much as you can on this one. And please go to my Patreon account. Uh, if you'll hang with me for a minute longer, I'll share my I'll share my Patreon screen with you that has the link to my Patreon account. And when the YouTube goes up, which will be later tonight, then please share, like, and subscribe to that one too. Even if having watched this, you don't actually watch the YouTube, still go there and please share, like, and subscribe it. So I can build a following on YouTube. That would be very nice. Okay, one more check of Facebook. I see I've got a few other comments. So Chris Bagby joined. Hi, Chris. It's nice to see you. It's been a while. And Cora Emanuel says, Joe, what would happen if Republicans block impeachment in the Senate? You mentioned, it earlier. Check out what AOC had to say about that today. I think that she was right on there. What would happen is that the election campaign would go on, and furthermore, it would be the case that uh, each and every Republican would have to run on where they stood on impeachment. Now, you may be asking me, well, what would happen if they simply refuse to take it up? If Mitch McConnell simply refuses to take up impeachment in the Senate, then every single Republican would have to run on the refusal of the Republicans to even take up an impeachment that had been voted on by the House. Yeah, he can pigeonhole it, but they'll all be blamed. Every Republican who runs for office in the Senate will be blamed for Mitch's failure to take up impeachment. Why would they be blamed? Because Mitch is their elected leader. They can replace him any day in the week. I mean, it's democratic in terms of who's going to be the majority leader of the Senate. It's not ordained that Mitch is going to be the majority leader. If the rank and file in the Republican Party in the Senate want to support impeachment, and if Mitch is blocking it, they can call a caucus and replace him as the majority leader. If they don't do that, they're all responsible. So the Democrats can hang that on them. In addition to hanging all of Trump's bad acts on them. That only gives the Democrats more to run on. The safest course for the Republican is to abandon the sinking ship right now, to vote with the Democrats to get rid of a lawless president, then to have Pence take over and either make his case or get out of the way so other Republicans can engage. That's the best thing that they can do at this point if they want to have a chance of survival in 2020. If they don't do that, I think they're going to be landslided again in 2020, provided, of course, that the Democrats don't run one of their terrible candidates. But if Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer want a landslide for the Democrats, they can have one for the asking. Now, maybe we can argue about whether they'll get such a landslide under Warren as opposed to Sanders, or vice versa. But I think there the verdict is clear. Nobody has a movement the size of Bernie Sanders right now. That is measured by his 1 million donees, not 1 million donations, more than 1 million donations, but 1 million donors. 1 million donors. Nobody has anywhere near that. And 1 million volunteers. Nobody has anywhere near that. I'm a volunteer for Sanders myself. Now, I'm not here representing the Sanders campaign. I mean, I'm frank about my support for Bernie, but I'm under no direction by the campaign, and have really had not much to do with it so far except to generally support it. That's probably the way it's going to remain, because I frankly don't do very well as part of an army following orders from the center. That's not my forte, as you may have gathered.
You're frozen.
Yeah, Bonnie says that I'm frozen. I know I'm frozen. The freezing is being created by, once again, high CPU usage. Yes, there I was. I was just at 98% CPU usage. That's amazing. My memory usage was still very low, but my CPU usage was very, very high. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to say so long for now, unless there are but some other good things. I'll be back tomorrow night. I'm not sure at this point whether it will be at 9 p.m. or at 9:30, but anyway, look for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way. Or, of course, technical difficulties. So Elizabeth says, "You're not frozen here. Tell everyone to get off other live streams." Cora says, "Thanks, Joe. Good night." Thanks to you, Cora. Once again, please share, like, and subscribe, and do whatever. I'll be with you again tomorrow night. Okay. So.